All right, we are at video number 4. We're going to look at some formatting and organizing worksheets. Let's start by going to row and column adjustments. Rows and columns can be adjusted by clicking and dragging, or with a right click and row height, you can put in a custom value. You can also double click if this is way oversized for the content that's in there. If you double click on the barrier between those two rows, it will automatically resize it to fit the content that's in there. So that really worked in that example, but here's an example where it might not be what I actually want to do. If I double clicked on column B, which as you can see this full string of text is in, it's going to jump column B to be super wide. Now that might work for me and it might not. As an example, in the rest of the items that are in this worksheet, I don't want it that wide. So I wouldn't want to do that, but those are some of the options you have for resizing. So let's look at some meaningful examples of when it comes up in your day-to-day work. We'll start by adjusting the row height. For me, this comes up most often in adjusting the column headers to tables that I'm working in. So here you can see the term insurance provider is hard to read, but if I make the row height here a little bit taller, and then I select that row and choose an option in the Home tab of the ribbon that is Wrap Text, which is at the top here, it will allow that text to be on multiple lines. And now Insurance Provider, when it bumps into not being visible anymore, wraps down to the next item, a lot more readable. So that is how I most often run into the need to adjust the row height. Adjusting column width is done in the ways I've shown you, where we can click and drag. The most often occurrence for me using that is to make sure that the content is visible in a table that I'm working in. So here there's a name column, but you can hardly see folks' names. We saw before that just automatically resizing sizes to the biggest set of information that's in that column. So that doesn't really work. That's not what I need. So I'm going to click and drag this to be just wide enough to see those names pretty well. I don't need to maybe see the longest name, but I want to make sure I can see most of the names in that column. So that's how I usually bump into the need, and that's how it can be done. Talk about inserting a new column, for example. We'll put something between column O and P here. And I'm going to do that by clicking on the column, right-clicking on it, and then going to Insert right here and insert a table column to the left. So now you can see between, I guess I put it between N and P, but we've got a new column here. I can name it whatever I need to and enter the data that's appropriate. So that is inserting a column. You can insert a row in a very similar way by clicking on that row, right-clicking and choosing Insert. You might also do that from clicking the entire row, not just the row of the table. And there is an insert option there as well. A couple different ways to do the same thing. But inserting is not hard. If I had a new piece of data I wanted to enter, I could go ahead and choose that row, say insert, and now I've got another space to enter that information. And then last but not least, you can always remove unnecessary rows or columns. And so you can see down here we've got a little piece of bad data where we don't actually have all the information. This shouldn't be in our table. So we can select that row, right-click, and say delete. Let's say that we didn't want to delete everything that was across the whole table for that row. We may just click into the table, right-click that item, and go ahead to delete. Delete the table row. There you go. It got rid of just that row there. It's not going to get rid of everything across the whole width of the data set, or the whole width of the worksheet. So those are adjusting rows and columns, deleting, inserting, all those things. Next, we're going to look at cell formatting and styles. So we've talked a little bit about some of this formatting in the basics. You can format text to look better. Now we're going to look more at why we would do it in data and analytics. And so we're going to format a table below to just look better. And we're going to bump into text formatting, shading of cells, borders around the cells, merging cells, number formatting, and some conditional formatting. All really useful items to understand how to do in Excel. Most often for me, this is in presenting information in like a table format. So I've got a couple tasks outlined for you to do on the table of information that's below. Pretty ugly as is. You wouldn't want to hand this off to your boss and say, here you go, I've got that information for you. You want to make sure it looks good. So start by text formatting. Let's go ahead and make the header row bold, apply a background color, and italicize the status column header. So these are our column headers, sorry, and we are going to go ahead and I can make those bold. I can insert a background fill color by using this here. Let's go ahead and put a gray. Now for me, I don't like when the column back or the cell background is that dark to have black letters as well. So let me change the font here to be white. Well, that looks a lot better. Also said that we are going to put some, well, maybe I'm skipping ahead, sorry, borders come next. Let's go ahead and get that row bold and apply background color, then italicize status. So here's where I'm not going to select everything, I'll just select status, and up above I have an option to italicize it. So there you go, we've got that top row looking like we want it. Next I want to put borders around all the data, a really common need. For the most part I'm creating tables and that sort of happens automatically, but that's not always something that you need or want to do. So when you want a border around each of the cells, which makes it look a lot nicer, you select the cells where you want a border. Then there's all sorts of options, just a bottom, just a top, left, right, no border at all borders, outside borders, thick borders. You can even draw borders only in specific areas. You can change the line color, the line style. For the most part, I'm typically just choosing for a table all borders. And so you can see now that each cell has a black border around it that's somewhat thin. So we got borders done. Let's talk about merging cells. The first time you bump into the need to merge cells is when you've got something like this. I've got a table and I want to say that this is the patient table. And it sits here and you go, oh, that looks kind of ugly. Well, I guess I could put it more in the middle of the table. Yeah, but it's not centered. Like, that's not what I need. I need this to be centered across the whole thing. So merging and centering is how we do that. We go ahead and select the range or area over which we want to merge. And then up above in our options, there's a button right here that is for merge and center. We select that and you can see what happened. All the cells we had selected are now merged as one giant cell, and the content is centered. Now it doesn't have to stay centered. You could make it a left, right, or center, but you know, often for table description names, we are putting it centered over the top. I'll show you another example of how I like to do this. I usually like to make that just a little bit different than the rest of it, maybe a little bit darker background color. Let's make it white, bold, and just a little bit bigger. Now this doesn't have the border, so I'm going to hit the border for this as well. So now we got patient table, we got those columns looking really good. Got our border in place, merged and centered. So let's now look at some number formatting. We've got a cost here, and cost is really an indication of a currency, and so having it just as a number usually isn't quite the right fit. So I'm going to go ahead and format this by right-clicking, choosing Format Cells, and Currency. Then I want a $sign in front, and for this instance, I don't want any cents. I don't want any decimal places afterwards, because these are pretty large whole numbers. So there we go. I've got cost looking like I want it to. And last but not least, we're going to do some conditional formatting. Now here's also an example where we've got some row and column resizing to do to get this looking right, like we had on the last item. So let's pull this until the names are the right on one line and easy to read. We've got all the departments working. Cost is looking pretty good. Status is looking pretty good, except I want discharge to be easy to read. All right, there we go. Now those are resized. I'm going to keep the rows how they are. I think it looks nice for now. And next we're going to do some conditional formatting. So this example I give of something to try is, let's go ahead and format the cost so that anything that is above $2,000 sticks out as red. So let's see how we do that. You're going to select the range that you want this formatting to be applied to, and in this case it's the cost column, column D, and just these cells here for now. Even if it was a large table, you just select that whole column. And I'm going to come up here in the Home tab of the ribbon under Conditional Formatting. We've got this here that says Highlight Cell Rules. And the very first one is greater than, which fits our need. We've got an ability to say highlight everything that is greater than what. So I'm going to put here greater than 2,000, as I pointed out in our use case. And you can choose how it's highlighted. Red, green, yellow. As I've said in the instructions, let's make it light green. So there we go. Now cost sticks out, and as we add information to the table, anything that is above $2,000 will continue to stick out in that way. Let's go ahead and shade the rows with active status in light green. And so how are we going to do that? It's very similar. We select the area we want to apply this to, choose conditional formatting. Let's go to highlight cell rules, and we're going to make this equals to. And so here's an example where we want it whenever it's equal to active. I want this not to be red, dark fill. We want it green. Okay, so now, even as you add more information, whenever it is active, it'll be green. Whenever it's above $2,000 of cost, it'll be red. So there you go. We got a table that's looking really nice and pointing out a little bit of signal of what we're trying to communicate. So now you've got some of the basics on some of the formatting options and how it comes to be very handy in analytics and healthcare. Next, let's go to freeze panes. This is a option in Excel that can make navigating a table really a much better experience. So freezing pane keeps the column and or the row that you select frozen so that you always see that information. And so that might not sound like you understand what that means. So we're going to show you in an example. That's the best way to see that. And we're going to show you how to freeze the top row, the first column, and freeze panes in a more custom way. So we'll head over to the next tab, which is Freezing Panes Example. This is an example of a table that's big and a little hard to navigate around. As we come down, because it's a table, the name of the columns does stay in place. But if we were to navigate to the right, we might lose track of who is the name of the patient we're working on. So let's go back to the top of the table. First, I want to freeze the first row because I want to be able to see that name every time, no matter where I go. So I'm going to go up here to View in the ribbon. I'm going to choose Freeze Panes and freeze the first column. When I do that, even though I come over to other parts of the table, I always see the name. So that's the utility you're going for, and it's extremely helpful, especially in big tables. It often comes up that you also want the top columns frozen so that they're easy and visible no matter how far down in the table you go. That is one nice thing about tables, is it does sort of do that for you, but it's also not visually as nice. So that's done by going to View, Freeze Pane, freeze the top row. So now top row is frozen, but look, we lost our freeze on the first column. So the option you have for doing both is actually to place your active cell right at the intersection where you want it frozen. Go to View, Freeze Pane. I'm going to unfreeze everything first. So now with just that active cell chosen right at the intersection of where I want to freeze it, I say Freeze Pane, and everything above that and to the left of that is frozen. So now you see that the top row is frozen, and as I go to the right, I keep that name. That's a really common need as you're navigating tables, to keep the information visible even in a large table. Okay, so let's go back. We got one last item to hit, printing and page setup. Doesn't come up as often for me anymore, but it used to be the case that we would design things in Excel to be able to print out and give to somebody. So if you find yourself needing to do that, there's a number of options available to you. They're mainly in the page layout section of the ribbon. And there's a number of things that you can do. You can set the print area to be a custom range of areas. So you may do that by selecting a certain number of cells and going here to print area, set print area. Now when I print, it will just print this area. Now you're seeing a small dotted line crop up, and that's because it's telling you that's where the page is going to cut off. This is not going to work for us. So you'll see in a later item how we'll scale that to fit. But first, let's change the orientation. By going here in the page setup options, you've got that simple switch from portrait to landscape. So now we're going to have it look as a landscape, and you don't see that line item anymore, so it's probably going to work as we need to, but I'll just show one other way that you have to scale this to fit. And so the primary way that you do that is in the additional options for page setup. You can see here there's a fit to, and so I'm going to choose fit to 1 page wide by 1 page tall. And there I also am going to choose print preview to just make sure it's looking like I want it to look. There you go. That's what I needed, just what I selected, coming out on 1 page. That is the kind of what I was looking for. By scaling it to the 1 by 1 and selecting just this range, I'm printing out, something very specific. One last thing I'll show how to do is how to add headers and footers. That is also up here in our options. In the little arrow that takes you to more options, the third tab over is headers and footers. Now there's some custom ones that come up and cover the common needs, where in the header you can put the page number, you may put in the footer the name of the file or the name of the worksheet, something like that. Those are standard, but you also can choose custom headers, and when you do, you can type in, let's say, a name or a date, something like that. It also has a couple options up here for common things that people put into headers and footers. So that's where those options are for you to set headers and footers, set the print area, and now you know a lot more about formatting and organizing worksheets in Excel. Can't wait to see you in the next class.